I'm not even making this up. I've had 2 times where pilots have called me in pre-op surgeries with their anesthesiologist and said, Joe, can I have this medication?
No way.
With the doctor on the phone. And I always have to say at that time, I don't know.
It's a guessing game. It's a guessing game.
All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today for another episode of the Difference Makers podcast here at Ramos Law today. Myself, Joe Ramos, my partner in the law firm here, and the head of our aviation division, Joe LoRusso.
Pleasure.
And we have with us today Austin O'Boyle, correct? I pronounce that right, Austin O'Boyle.
Right.
Who I had to take notes on this. I mean, your CV and accomplishments, things you've done is pretty extensive. So I wrote down a couple because I think we're going to ask you to start and tell us more about yourself. But you're Vice President of Advocacy at Aristotle International, and you've been named as one of the top 25 lobbyists, do quite a bit of work, it sounds like, in Washington, D.C. And as you know, Joe and I, both pilots, both with a significant interest in aviation and in pilots and in pilot mental health. And obviously, I think you're part of the forefront of that. So could you maybe start, Austin, by telling us just a little bit about yourself? I gave you no credit for the long CV I could have given there. But tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe we'll wade into some of the pilot mental health issues that we have in common.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I appreciate you both for having me on. So thank you very much for the opportunity. So like you said, VP of Advocacy over at Aristotle. Aristotle does a whole lot of things. I was talking with Joe a little bit before we got on air here, but I head up our advocacy consulting division as well as our lobbying division. So essentially helping clients, both large and small in the trade association space, advocacy organization space, and the corporation space, basically build out advocacy strategies, whether it's grassroots, grass tops programs, public affairs campaigns, as well as direct lobbying on the Hill. We do state level work as well, but most of my work focuses on the federal side. Before Aristotle, worked in government affairs at various trade associations, National Apartment Association, American College of Surgeons, ran my own public affairs shop for a little bit, and ran a whole bunch of political campaigns, running on pizza and Red Bull for years in my early career. So I'm happy to be away from that for the time being. But in terms of the aviation mental health piece, been working with the Pilot Mental Health Campaign now for several years, who's just been extremely instrumental in drafting, getting the bill introduced, the Mental Health and Aviation Act. Very proud of the bill. We're in the throes of it now, as I'm sure we'll kind of get into later on in the podcast. But I hope that was a good enough overview of me, but I could go on for a little bit. But
I got to say, before we dive into the whole, into the bill, I also have some notes, and I got to say, man, as Dr. Ramos said, 2025 top lobbyist by NILE, 5 times top lobbyist The Hill, 4 times top lobbyist award winner for the National Institute for Lobbying and Ethics, top 20 in 2022 award winner for the Advocacy Association. I mean, I'll toot your horn for you so you don't have to. Unbelievably impressive. How does somebody decide to get into this space, to get into lobbying? Is it an itch? Was it always, am I going to talk to your mom and your mom's going to say, Austin knew it from the moment he was 6, he was going to be a lobbyist? How did you get into this space?
Well, so oddly enough, I always knew it was going to be politics. I didn't know where it was going to go, right? But from a kid, I actually did have all the presidents and the VPs memorized from like second grade on. I don't have it anymore, so don't ask me who was the 15th president. But at one point I did. How I got into lobbying, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. I started running campaigns when I was in college at the state level. I've always been really good at business development. So I started helping. I partnered with a political consulting firm when I was in college to start recruiting state level candidates for them in different states. I was fairly successful at that. And then they offered me a full-time job in DC. Jumped at it and started working on congressional U.S. Senate races and doing a whole bunch of BD, bringing in Senate clients and stuff for them. The problem was it was just very, you always have to find a new horse, right? So every 2 years, I'm constantly having to go find new candidates. If your candidate wins the primary but loses in the general, it's like, great, well, I have to go find new people who are fit and ready to serve for public office, right? It was exhausting. So for me, I kind of looked at the board of possibilities in the political sphere and said, well, legislation typically takes a really long time and has some job stability there. So that's what kind of opened my mind to government affairs. And I think with my political background, I brought a lot of stuff that people didn't necessarily do in DC, which was I mixed the government affairs with everything I had learned on the political campaign side, right? How to mobilize supporters, make sure that they're targeting the right people. And over time, I just kind of built out the tactics to be effective at it. So, but that's kind of how the door opened to government affairs for me.
Wow. And you, as part of that, I saw, and again, as Joe said, there's so many things that we could talk about with you. You've created and ran several PACs. Mm-hmm. Does that tie hand in hand with the political action committee stuff you've done?
Yeah. So, the PAC side of my life was a couple of years back. But yeah, political action committees are extremely important. Love it or hate it, money plays a big role in politics, right? And in government. So just making sure that you understand, how to effectively raise money, whether it's, through a membership organization, which is where most of my experience comes from. Been involved in running a few super PACs at the state and federal level. So it's just something that it's a necessary part of our system. But they definitely go hand in hand, and, just being able to open doors, right? So whether it's attending a fundraiser and getting some face time with a member of Congress that you ordinarily wouldn't have been able to get in front of, that's PACs are really the door opener in a lot of situations for organizations. So they'll leverage their PACs effectively to be able to go and have a conversation that they wouldn't have been able to have unless they had a strong, effective PAC. So they go hand in hand for sure.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. What a fantastic career. And through this career, obviously, is where we all met with the Pilot Mental Health Campaign. When did you guys get involved there? When did Aristotle or you hit the ground running with PMHC?
Yeah, so it was a little right after their founding in 2023. I think Brian had found Aristotle. Brian Baumhoff, the founder of PMHC, had found Aristotle through a Google search and had set up a demo for some of our tech stuff, I think. But we got to talking. Mental health is very an issue of passion for me, just generally speaking. So I was going to do anything I could to get him in as a client because I thought it was just I like working on cool stuff. There's a lot of boring issues in policy, and this was not one of them. So we got to talking, and I kind of laid out a strategic game plan that I thought through for maybe 24 hours in terms of where PMHC could go to affect policy. And Brian was all for it. And they've been a great partner ever since. But, Brian, Chris Finlayson, who's the executive director of PMHC, we have a really great working relationship. We've been able to move stuff much quicker than I think anybody thought possible. So it's been a great partnership overall.
Yeah, I know when Joe shared with me, the things that you guys were doing, as you know, Joe's really taken the lead in aviation and certainly directs all of our aviation stuff here in the firm. When he explained to me where you guys are taking this and what you've been doing, how effective you've been, I couldn't wait to talk to you today.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a mountain to climb, but we have momentum on our side now, so it's all pointing in the right direction, which is great.
You have been my first experience with the whole lobbying world and for pushing a bill from scratch all the way to getting it through the House and getting it into the Senate. And to echo what Dr. Ramos was saying, this has been mind-blowing for me. And I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that, right? That a bill can be drafted, introduced, lobbied, go through the House. Now we're at the Senate in such a small time. Yeah. Is this unusual? Is this typical of a bill running through, or is there just that much motivation and push behind this one?
It's completely unheard of, to be completely honest. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back or even PMHC, but it's, I always give the thing with Brian and Chris and PMHC was it was a brand new organization without a lot of political knowledge, right? So Brian has, a little bit of campaign background in his repertoire, but they were brand new to Washington and how Washington works. Changing the law is supposed to be really hard. And, it was our system of government was set up for this to take a long time. And a lot of people have to put eyeballs on legislation before it goes to the president's desk. But I always use the example to help kind of temper expectations every now and then of this is not normal. I had a client that brought me on maybe 3 years ago to help with a bill We got that bill over the finish line in July of this past year. But before they had hired me, they'd been working on that particular piece of legislation for 8 years. So it was 11 years in total before it was introduced for the first time and signed into law. So it's really just been a culmination of everybody being we had the right people at the right time. And it's not just PMHC and myself. It's you guys also. Big kudos to you. I talked to Joe a little bit about this earlier. You guys are very active in helping people get their medicals back, raising awareness of the problems at the FAA. I want to shout out, various people that have just shared their stories, because I think that this has been a big issue where, and I'm new to the aviation sector, right? This is kind of my first stint working in aviation policy. Getting to hear stories from individual aviators, whether pilots, controllers, et cetera. We had our first fly-in back in 2024, and it was mind-blowing. I mean, just to hear some of the stories that people had kept hidden for so long. But I think this movement and PMHC had given them the opportunity to really feel comfortable opening up about their experiences with mental health policy and procedure at the FAA. But you just hear all these horror stories about how people are having to white-knuckle their life, right? And we're not talking any extreme mental illness, right? We're talking depression. We're talking general anxiety, things that everybody goes through. You're going through a divorce, you have a loss in your family, et cetera. And aviators have had to hide all of that information for years just to maintain their profession. And if they're not professional pilots, this is something that's been very unique for me to witness, because again, I'm not in the aviation community like you all are, and everybody I've met through PMHC is. It's an identity, right? I mean, being a pilot is an identity. And having that taken away from you, even if you're not a professional pilot, is so damaging to the individual, because it's who they are. And people just don't know what to do with themselves. So they will go to great lengths to make sure that they can hold on to that medical to continue flying. And there's no viable route for them to get any sort of help whatsoever. So it's really been mind-boggling for me, but I'm just very happy to be a part of it.
Now, I've got a quick question along those lines. You mentioned and why this is progressing so well. You mentioned the right people, the right place, the right time. Obviously, the strength of your involvement in your team and others that you've helped bring in. But tell me a little bit about the funding part, because I wouldn't think something so new as a pilot mental health campaign could have very good funding. And what do you guys need, and how far behind or ahead? I think pilots that watch us need to know, where they might be able to help.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, it's a completely grassroots organization. They recruited my help from the professional side because it was needed. But I mean, it's really just a group of pilots, controllers, and even just family and general supporters of fixing this problem that have really come together. The organization was bootstrapped. I think it was just a small group of people that chipped in some money to kind of get things rolling. But it also kind of grew into our success kind of led to further fundraising, right? People saw how quick things were moving and how effective we were being on the policy side of things. And they said, okay, this is a worthy investment, because like you said, I mean, I've seen a lot of niche policy organizations get stood up on particular issues, and they fizzle out pretty quickly because they just don't have the funding, but it's also because they're not being as effective as they can be or should be. And that gives people pause. It's like investing in a company, right? If a company's, fledgling, you're not going to put money in that stock because it's not going to go up, in your opinion, right? So it's kind of the same thing with PMHC. Again, it's grassroots, right? It's people making contributions to kind of help fund these efforts. Beyond lobbying, PMHC does a ton of educating. Just the broader populace of the country on this issue, because it's not just an individual problem, it's also an aviation safety problem. So we've really relied on, people contributing whatever they can on an ongoing basis just to be able to keep everything moving forward. So I always push people to give what they can, if they can, just because it's going to help us continue to move mountains for as long as we need to.
And where are we at in that process? So I know we've cleared the House, right? The bill has unanimously cleared the House, introduced to the Senate, right? It went through the 119th. Now it's with the Senate. The crystal ball question, of course, that everybody wants to know: when is this ending up on the desk? When does this get to?
We want answers. We want answers. Come on, us.
And we are.
Well, I was going to say I'm no Nostradamus, but I can try. But yeah, I mean, we got the bill through the House in September under a process called suspension, which is basically where they suspend the rules for more non-controversial legislation that shouldn't necessarily be impeded by any political narratives or anything like that. We had, some scary, there were some people that thought about opposing the bill. We were able to whip them in line, and we got it through unanimously, which was great. We had a long slog of negotiations in the Senate. Senator Hoeven and Senator Duckworth, obviously the two co-leads on that piece of legislation on the Senate side, have been great champions. I work with Senator Hoeven's staff and Senator Duckworth's staff very closely. Every day, I think Hoeven's deputy chief of staff gets aggravated at me sometimes at how much I bother him. But, we're in good shape. So basically, we negotiated the bill on the back end. So the bills are different, right? So the bill text in the Senate is slightly different from the bill text in the House. The Senate provided more funding. They expanded on the public information side of it to let pilots and ATCs know that this help is going to be available without professional repercussions. So they kind of put a little bit more teeth to the public information campaign. So the bill actually got better, which is what we were fighting for on the back end in the Senate. So, but we also wanted to make sure, because it has to go through the Commerce Committee, right? That's kind of the next step, is getting it marked up in Commerce. Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Maria Cantwell are the chairman and ranking member, respectively, of that committee. But we came out really strong. We have, I believe, 16 co-sponsors as of today, including original co-sponsors. Obviously, ranking member of the Aviation Subcommittee, Tammy Duckworth, is the Democratic co-lead. But Chairman Moran was also an original co-sponsor. He chairs the Aviation Subcommittee, which is huge. So getting those two people involved in this legislation from the jump has been monumental on the Senate side of things. So now it's just making sure that we're running the process of getting it marked up. We're hoping that the bill will be marked up before the end of Q1 of this coming year. We're working with Commerce Committee staff and Senator Cruz's staff to make sure that we get it on the docket. And then from there, it basically, traditionally, it would go to the Senate floor for a vote. We're trying to push a process that's called unanimous consent in the Senate, which is essentially the same thing in the House. Suspension in the House requires a 2/3 majority vote to pass a bill out through suspension. In the Senate, any one senator, if they oppose the bill, can hold it up and force it to go to the floor for a vote. So it's a little bit more of a fragile process. It's hard to get floor time in the Senate right now, coming up on the midterms, right? So there's a lot of political bills, a lot of messaging bills, and anything the president wants to push through before the end of 2026 is going to be Majority Leader Thune's priority, right? Just to make sure that they can maintain control. But so that's why we're moving unanimous consent is kind of our next step here. So once we get through the Commerce Committee, we're going to push for unanimous consent, and not to rant too much longer. But since the bills are different, it will have to go back to the House for another suspension vote. We're fairly confident on that side of the playing field, just because obviously we sailed through the first time. And then from that point forward, it'll go to the president's desk for signature.
Wow.
It sounds like a lot of steps.
June?
But
Is it June?
we're very hopeful that the bill can be passed standalone by the end of this Congress. So we're very hopeful for that.
Wow. It's exciting.
That's big.
Yeah, we're very excited.
So thanks for outlining that process, because I'm not well versed in that. So to understand what you're going through on your end and how that walks through and where the biggest hurdles and such are, I think that's fantastic for everybody to hear, because we live in this world nowadays of we want everything now. I think that's why Joe was probably afraid to ask the question like, "Hey, when are you getting this done?" Because it's kind of the world we live in. But
right.
But so thanks for walking us through that. I have a question with regard to that, more kind of on the negative side of things. When you get pushback, like so I think Joe and I go, well, why wouldn't there be a unanimous vote, right? I mean, that'd be our position.
Right. Yeah.
This is a no-brainer. So I ask you, and that's why I'm saying leaning towards the negative side, why wouldn't there be a unanimous vote? What kind of pushback do you give? Is it stuff like I'd written down here on my paper? One of the things I imagine you hear is, balancing the importance of pilot mental health with public safety.
Yes.
Is that the kind of things that prevent a unanimous vote? What do you hear that where does this come in where people would not be for this?
Yeah, so it's there's two sides of that coin, right? So, and I'm not going to name any names, but during our markup hearing in the House through the Transportation and Infrastructure, committee, it went through unanimously, but there was a member of the House that had made a comment about not wanting crazy people flying planes. That was a verbatim comment that was made. I actually thought PMHC should make some T-shirts that said that on it as a joke, but we had enough influence at that point to be able to get Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larson to be able to push back on any no vote in committee. So it went through the T&I committee unanimously as well. But that was something where I actually ran into that member at the congressional baseball game, and I told him I think he needs to go back and reread the bill because your comment is exactly what we're trying to stop from happening, right? This legislation, and that's kind of where it comes into play. This is an issue where I think looking at it through the lens of, obviously, as you both said, it's a no-brainer for you. You're involved in aviation. You deal with a lot of pilots day to day. For the general population, and members of Congress and senators always have to think about the constituent point of view of the general person, right? It can be scary when you think of, if you hear mental health, pilots and ATCs being able to go seek further mental health care, you think, well, I don't feel comfortable as a general, person who flies on commercial flights with a pilot that might be going through some chaotic time in their life and they're on medication and all this other stuff. It can get people uneasy. So this has kind of been a big educational push for us, where we're having these conversations of we're not asking for anything where we want, severe mentally ill individuals flying planes, right? We're not talking about schizophrenia here. We're talking about general anxiety, general depression. People deal with these things day to day. Even if you don't have a mental illness, most people experience one of the two at some point throughout their lives, right? So this has been something we've had to have those conversations of making sure that people understand we're not asking for lowering of the guardrails, right? We're just asking for folks to be able to go seek help so that they can fly planes competently and be in the right mindset. If there's an individual who is going through a divorce, loss of a loved one, and maybe having some family issues on top of an already super stressful profession where you're away from your family a large portion of the time, this is something where that person's going to be stressed out in the cockpit, and they can't talk to, as it sits right now, they cannot speak to people about it. They can't go seek SSRI help without opening the door to potentially losing their medical certificate and getting pulled from their profession. So it's just been educating people, and the stories from individuals has really won the day on that side, because I think people had no idea this was going on. I didn't know this was going on until I met Brian and Chris. And once you hear it, it becomes common sense, right? So it's really just been an education piece where we need to get in front of as many members as we can. I think at this point, PMHC collectively, between the fly-in events where we bring people to DC and just direct lobbying meetings, I think we've had over 300 meetings at this point with different members of Congress. So this is just something where we need to educate, right? Because to us, it's a no-brainer. It's common sense. We want people to go get help, not only for them as an individual, but for the safety of the flying public. But it's something that, from a member of Congress's perspective, you always need to see it through their eyes of, how could this potentially blow back on me, right? If somebody runs with a story, or if that member of Congress that made that comment about crazy people flying planes, if that's even a slight question in their mind of that could be how this bill is perceived if people don't do their homework, they're going to be skittish. And that's our job, to make sure that we massage the issue and really educate them on, that's not how this bill is set up, A, but B, you have constituents in your district that are dealing with this right now and are still flying, right? Whether they're self-medicating, they're turning to alcohol, they're turning to just white-knuckling everything. They are in distress right now, flying planes today. So instead of being worried about optics or public perception, which we're working, we work with them on messaging to make sure they're comfortable with it. But this is an easy solution that's going to make everybody safer, from the individual pilot or ATC all the way to the flying public. They can feel secure that they have a pilot who is dealing with their problems in a productive manner and keeping everyone safe across the board.
Yeah, I have one quick comment on that, and then Joe, I'm sure you probably have comments based on that too. Thanks, Austin. I think that's huge. Here's one of the reasons. Not only did it strike me, you said Joe and I, you kind of unanimously as pilots go, "Hey, this is a no-brainer." But
Yeah.
I want to relate something to you, like even from my other professional life as a medical doctor. I have friends, colleagues in medicine, and have known people. I've been in the operating room with one surgeon who suffered from bipolar disorder. And in the middle of the surgery, he just sat down in the corner while I was holding the renal artery clamped, and he just sat there and he just wouldn't say anything. And where I'm going with this is this: in my medical life, we encourage our colleagues to get treatment, to get help. Tons of drug abuse, tons of alcohol abuse, of your surgeon, of the person taking care of you in trauma. If you show up in a trauma center, like where I worked for all those years, and they're still practicing medical doctors, and they're getting help, and they have people's lives in their hand. And so the other reason this struck me as a no-brainer on the pilot side is, the other professions, it just seems like there's a bias here to me where we get I don't know if you saw the intake this morning, Joe. We have an intake this morning. It's so sad. I was reading it. We get these from pilots all across the country every day. And it'll be, somebody's bombed in Afghanistan, and afterwards they had a little PTSD and they went and saw somebody because bombs were dropping on their head and one of their buddies died. And they've been flying for years since then and doing well, but all of a sudden they're afraid to bring that up because if that comes back up, maybe they go on and they're on the wrong medicine or something. It's all over for them. And, who hasn't gone through a divorce and suffered depression? Going through the divorce, that's depressing, right? But they're not allowed to be normal people. In my medical life, they're allowed to be normal people. Get help. Keep your medical license. Keep practicing. Keep seeing people. Keep helping people. It just seems to me like in the pilot world, there seems to be like this massive hammer, and really nothing else. And so everybody runs from the massive hammer.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's too many stories that are just heartbreaking. We just heard another one where, this woman's husband, I forget how old he was, but, he basically told their teenage son that he felt that he had no choice but to take his own life. And then about a week later he did, because he couldn't go seek any help and he couldn't do anything about it. And people were just backed into a corner, and you become a professional aviator and you love what you do. And you cannot, if anything that life throws at you personally, you have no recourse to be able to deal with any of it. And this is something that we've just seen time and time again. I've seen pilots that are prescribing Xanax to their pets so that they can take their pets' medications and not have it be on record. Oh, yeah. It's insane. And like you said, the imbalance between different professions, law enforcement, medical doctors, et cetera. You're allowed to go seek treatment. You brought up bipolar disorder. I don't mind sharing this because it's very public, but I have bipolar disorder. I suffer from bipolar disorder myself. Have been on, psychiatry, psychologists, for years, and I know how to manage my illness. But this is something where different professions, I change the law, right? My job is to go help organizations change the law.
Yes.
We're talking about very serious professions, and yes, aviators have lives in their hand, as do medical doctors, as you just pointed out. It's unfair. And, I think that for too long, people have almost chalked it up to pilots almost not being human. They don't think, you don't see the pilot all the time when you get on the plane, right? Sometimes the cockpit doors shut. You just know that somebody's up there that's going to fly you to your destination safely. But that's something where I think that they've almost been dehumanized in a way where they can't go get any help, and no one has really cared about them up until this point. And if you say anything about it, you're flagged, and your medical's probably going to be pulled because, well, why do you care? You must have something going on. So it's just a common sense solution to be able to let people go deal with their problems in a productive manner, and we want pilots and air traffic controllers, again, two of the most stressful professions you can have. We want them at the top of their game, right? We want people being focused. We want people on task. We want people at the best of their abilities. If they're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff that they need to suppress just to be able to stay in the cockpit, they're not going to be at the top of their game. And also, if you limit who can fly an airplane or be a controller to people that have no depression or anxiety, you might have 10 people, maybe. And that's, if you know what I mean? Like, there's nobody that's going to be able to do those jobs. So, this is something that I think is just common sense. But again, it's about educating. And again, like you said, I think it's a key point that there is that great imbalance right now between professions.
Yeah.
Also, I'm curious. So, and I know you know about this, but back in 2022, we had the crossover between the VA and the FAA, where they shared records.
Yep.
And that's an investigation that is still ongoing today, where we still have pilots, we still have veterans call in and say, Joe, I have a PTSD score of 70%, right? Like I can't go into a movie theater, I can't go to a concert, but I know I can't do that, and so I don't do that.
Right.
But you put me in a flight for life helicopter like I did in Iraq or Afghanistan. I'm mission focused. I'm ready, right? And that's my happy place. That's where I save lives. That's where I get things done. And we always flirt with that term, aeromedical significance, right? That we always talk about, right? Well, yeah, they have PTSD, and yeah, they don't do well in social settings or public settings, but aeromedically, that's not significant because they're mission ready and they do what they're supposed to do. And that investigation was absolutely devastating to our industry. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of pilots grounded, emergency revocations. We had civil penalties issued throughout. It was just absolutely devastating, specifically to the flight for life world, because there were a lot of those individuals that suffered with PTSD, anxiety, depression.
Right.
But why I bring that up is I'm curious, has there been any involvement with other groups like the VA or like even, talking about different lobbying groups, different unions that you've had to work with, negotiate with, or even fight off as you've been working towards these bills? Because as we know, aviation is not just independent, right? Other groups have their tentacles, like the VA, into the FAA and the aviation space. Has there been any obstacles? Is that even something that you considered as you've been introducing and working these bills?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a couple layers there. On the VA side, we had worked with Representative Caston, who had sent a letter to a couple administrators asking about the VA data share. And that's actually part of PMHC's one of our next tranches, right? Because the MHAA, the Mental Health and Aviation Act, is a huge step forward, right? But for us, there's still a whole lot more work to be done post MHAA passage, if and when that does happen, right? So there's a whole lot to uncover there, because I think that, like you said, I mean, tens of thousands of military aviators. We had someone at PMHC who was involved on the military side of things, and I believe he flew in the Navy for a long time, had seen combat. And the military is actually really good about, folks seeking help, which is actually, I think people think it would be backwards, but they're actually pretty progressive on that side. I mean, he was dealing with PTSD. They made him go get help. Once he was back and ready, they let him go back and fly again. Because he was fine. But once he left the military, he's never been issued a medical, because they went back and they saw PTSD on the record and they said, nope, not letting that happen. And it's ridiculous, because, I mean, if I want anybody flying my plane, I would like someone, if they were flying combat tours in Iraq or Afghanistan, I'm pretty sure they can get me to DC on any given day. I think it should be pretty self-explanatory. In terms of opposition, we haven't had overt opposition from outside of the aviation industry. It took a while to coalesce the industry itself around the bill. We had some internal obstacles in the industry initially with some groups that were hesitant about the bill. But at this point, we've pretty much coalesced the entire industry. I mean, A4A, Airlines for America, who represent the airlines, they're on board. NAFCA, ALPA, APA, SWAPA, I mean, every, alphabet soup of DC. But everybody has pretty much backed the bill at this point, which is great. At this point for us, it's about PMHC has led the charge on this bill consistently. And for us, we need to make sure that we keep the industry accountable to drive this forward, right? Because PMHC is a small grassroots organization that's done a whole lot of work. We've punched well above our weight, but having those bigger organizations really push with us is going to help drive this bill even faster. So that's something that we're really focusing on now. We're in coalition talks to make sure that we have kind of a group that not only pushes this piece of legislation, but as I just referenced earlier, thinks about what the future iterations of mental health reform in aviation look like, so that an issue as rare as this, where the entire industry gets behind it, because you're talking unions and airlines being at the same table on this thing.
Wild.
This is something where we want to make sure that we keep these voices at the table, so that way with the next iteration of changes that need to happen, we can have those conversations collectively as a group. But in terms of overt opposition from anyone else, there really hasn't been any. which has been
That's
nice because usually I always have somebody throwing punches on
Yes.
the other side. But
Yeah.
it's really just been. I think we did a really great job of building up a PR push, right? A lot of earned media around this, a lot of TV spots. I know Chris has been on and off Fox News here and there. A lot of articles through CNN, The Atlantic, New York Times, etc. So I think there's been almost a silent momentum that has been building over the years. So I think at this point, we've done a really good job of peppering the ground through the public relations space where people are educated enough on this that they know if there is anybody that really opposes this, momentum is on our side, right? So it'd be harder for them to really push back on this at this point. If they wanted to do that, it would have been right as the bill was introduced. They would have had to try to, kill it then, honestly, because at this point it has a lot of legs behind it. So I think people are hesitant.
That's great. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Big thing that I was wondering is initially there were two bills, weren't there? There was also a medication transparency. What has happened with the medication transparency? Is that still on the table? Has that fallen to lesser with the Mental Health and Aviation Act? Where are we at with that bill?
Yeah, so the Aviation Medication Transparency Act is the other bill. I've kind of coined it the little brother bill internally, but yeah, that bill has been introduced in both the House and the Senate as well. That bill has definitely taken a back seat to the MHAA, obviously,
Sure.
just because of the expansive nature of MHAA and how big that change would be. But that bill has been out in the Senate and the House. It has a handful of co-sponsors in the House, a handful of co-sponsors in the Senate. That's probably going to be a 120th Congress priority.
Okay.
And that's also something that we're going to start working with the Department of Transportation on, because we've gotten some decent feedback from some Senate offices that they think that Secretary Duffy might be willing to do that just through executive action as opposed to having to do legislation.
Wow.
But that bill is still out in the ether as well. So, I mean, this isn't just a one and done bill with MHA, as I said. I mean, the medication bill is just another example of there are a lot of needed reforms here. So it's just going to be a matter of, seeing how the chips fall post MHA and what the next big pushes are. But I think the medication bill is something that will get done before the end of the 120th Congress, whether it's through executive action or through legislation.
That one's an interesting bill. I know I've had, and I'm not even making this up, I've had 2 times where pilots have called me in pre-op surgeries with their anesthesiologist and said, Joe, can I have this medication?
No way.
With the doctor on the phone. And I always have to say at that time, I don't know, right? Because there is no published list of pharmaceuticals, right? There's an over-the-counter published list that we only recently got last year.
Correct.
But there is no list of pharmaceuticals. So it's hit the forums, right? What pilot's gotten through with this? What pilot's gotten through with this? Who's gotten denied here?
It's a guessing game. It's a guessing game.
There's no way to live a medical life, right? To guess and say, all right, well, I might be able to take this, but that's the end of my career. So,
right.
Well, and a lot of pilots just make mistakes, like because they can't find it easily, right? It's buried in an AME field guide that's 800 pages long,
right?
And it's written in medical jargon. So, I mean, it's hard to understand in the first place. But I mean, if I'm going into a doctor's office and they put me on a certain blood pressure medication, it could disqualify me from being able to get cleared by the FAA because it's just a different brand of medication when another brand was already approved, but I just didn't know it. And then all of a sudden it opens the door and the traps to now I have to go through this entire medical process with the FAA, which we all know costs a ton of time and money and takes forever to get through. So it's really, there's just so many pitfalls right now when it comes to FAA mental health policy. So that's, there's a lot to do. There's no shortage of things that need to change here. So
that's important.
Yeah, you'll be working on this for a while.
Yeah.
I believe so.
But if you keep having these kind of results, that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. And before we get to what can we do, I have to ask kind of a lighthearted question. Are you going to get a pilot's license now? Because you've seen both sides of it all around it. Are we Austin going to be a pilot, or are we Austin? I don't know.
I know I'm allowed to fly sport planes, I think, which, but I've talked about it, but as I told you earlier, I had flight anxiety. I got to fly on a Falcon earlier this week and had a really wacky experience with what went on there, but little acrobatic tricks there, but potentially. Potentially.
The bug is hit, maybe.
Yeah. Listen, it's definitely of interest. It's definitely of interest,
There it
especially
is.
meeting everybody. But jury's still out on that one. We'll see.
Okay.
My wife always says that I could be in a room of 2,000 people. And if there's one pilot in the room, I'll find them.
Yeah.
I love that.
Pilots just,
You'll always have friends, always something to talk about with the pilot folks, you know?
Yeah. I really appreciate, what you're doing. I think you made a statement earlier that I just want to repeat. And it's kind of when you mentioned your own, health struggles that you deal with. If they took everybody in every profession and they knocked out people like they knock out pilots right now without work like what you're doing, if they start knocking out pilots, knocking out professions though, I bet many of our presidents couldn't have been president. Look at this stuff. We started with your resume that was so long we barely scratched on it. Look all the stuff that you've accomplished. Look how capable, right? All the doctors I've worked with, it's some of the best, absolutely best at what they do, and so on and so forth. And they can all get help, and they can all perform great, unless you're a pilot.
Yep.
No, I agree. I think it's a shame that the aviation communities had to deal with this problem for this long. It's unjustifiable in my opinion, and I'm sure many other people's opinions. It's just something where, like you said, I don't. There's probably very few members of Congress that don't deal with something,
Right.
depression, anxiety, etc.
Yes.
So this is something where, if we're being fair, right, quote unquote fair, this is something where the aviation profession and the community in general has been, specifically targeted on this front. And honestly, I think it's just because there have been such harsh ramifications for folks that have spoken up. So there really hasn't been any room for them to make change on this, because the FAA is still operating as if it's the 1970s DSM, right? In terms of how they're classifying different mental illness. ADHD is so prevalent in our society, right? OCD has an uptick in our society. We're just talking about people that are dealing with normal everyday issues and being able to go seek help. It's common sense. And obviously I have this conversation with both of you. I know you also think it's common sense. It's just a matter of making sure that we can educate as many people as we can on this to make sure that they see it that way as well. And, when it comes to the general population that doesn't understand the bill, doesn't read legislation, right? This is something where you're flying with pilots that are potentially dealing with things today and are having to suppress all of their feelings and emotions and everything else they're dealing with. You're at more risk now, right? If they go get help, you are not at high risk. So, we're not talking about, well, again, we want guardrails. We're not saying everybody should be able to fly planes. But what I am saying is, if you put your hand up and say, I am not okay today, you should be able to go seek the treatment you need to get back to 100%. And once you've been cleared in a timely manner, be able to get back in the cockpit without being out of work for years. So I think that's a big thing that people just need to understand moving forward.
And I add one last thing to that. The other way that we're seeing this used, we've had several cases come in here to our firm where people have realized that this is so lopsided against pilots that now it's being used as a sword. For example, in divorce. One person getting mad at the other and saying, oh, you want to know what? He suffers from this, or he does this, or he's taking that. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a private, inquiry sent that the FAA follows up on.
So true.
And we're seeing it more and more and more where, even if I don't like Joe, I get mad at him in our law partnership. And I say, LoRusso goes down to Mexico once a month and he picks up his ADHD meds. All of a sudden, they'll investigate him.
Sure.
And really, I'm just a pissed off law partner because of something he did. It's so unfair.
It's so unfair. Yeah. And to take that one step further, this is something that I don't think we've really explored a lot, but worth mentioning, on a pilot who has a car wreck like any other citizen, right?
Yes.
And you get, you have damages. Obviously, that's what we do at Ramos Law is we protect those individuals that have experienced that type of injury, and we represent them in making them whole again, right, for their damages. And a lot of that, of course, is physical, right, like a broken bone or even like a soft tissue. But a lot of that is mental and emotional as well,
Definitely.
Right? Having to deal with maybe a broken bone for 6 months, and every single movement you have to think about and slow down your day so that you don't hurt or damage that bone again or something like that.
Right.
But those damages oftentimes are not available to pilots.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
the moment that we say that in a personal injury suit that, hey, they're dealing with a little bit of depression or anger or frustration or emotions, and that goes to the FAA, we're done.
Yep.
We're done right there. So they're not even afforded the same damages that a general citizen has on a personal injury case.
That's right.
Pilots have just had to be in hiding for so long on anything medically relevant, right? I think it's just something where they've gotten so accustomed to hiding anything they're dealing with medically. There was a survey that came out and a lot of data there that, 56% of pilots are adverse to seeking any form of healthcare, not just mental health care, but any healthcare, because they're afraid of what happens, right? Going to the doctor is a scary thing for pilots because if something goes wrong or I'm put on a medication, now all of a sudden it opens up a can of worms that I have to deal with the FAA. And like you said, I mean, what you said, Dr. Ramos, is concerning to me because now it even dwindles down the number of people in your private life that you're comfortable talking to about problems. Like if I wasn't able to go see a psychiatrist or a therapist, et cetera, I want to rely on my best friend to be able to maybe talk about some of my problems that I'm dealing with. But now all of a sudden I have to have that thought in the back of my mind of what happens if he gets pissed off at me one day and decides to report me to the FAA. Now all of a sudden we are isolating aviators to the point where they can't talk about it. They can't seek treatment. They just need to stay quiet and continue living their life. So, I mean, it's untenable for anybody, and this community deserves change. So I'm excited that we're moving in the right direction.
Is it time for the what can we do?
What can we do?
Is it? Okay. Yeah. So tell us and tell any listeners, any pilots that might be listening as well, us as attorneys, kind of the whole audience here. What can we do?
Well, I think the biggest thing you can do is support the pilot mental health campaign. Whether that's through volunteering, whether that's through attending or flying, whether that's through, financing, right? We're not looking for millions of dollars. Anything helps. I think the biggest piece here is we just need to continue fighting the fight, and PMHC has been at the forefront every step of the way. It's been interesting to see, but I mean, we provide a lot of legislative information to even a lot of the larger groups out in the aviation space that people would be familiar with, because we are the ones that are really driving this forward right now. And I think another piece to support is if you're a member of any large union, a member of any general aviation association, et cetera, tell them about this bill and the importance that it plays in aviation, because this is something where even if they've officially endorsed, we need help in terms of, PMHC is a Spitfire organization that's really kicking in every door we can. But it would be very helpful if some of the bigger organizations that have the weight and the name power in DC also help more proactively and have more lobbying meetings, educate more, because that's just going to amplify and act as a force multiplier for us to be able to drive things through quicker. So I think just speaking up to any organization that you're a part of, telling them how important it is to you, and supporting PMHC in any way that you can, because we want to win this fight by the end of this coming year so that we don't have to reintroduce this bill again in 27 in the new Congress. And I think it's very viable. I think we can get there, but we need as much help as we can get.
And you guys have an advocacy day coming up, right?
We do. February 4th, I believe, is the solidified date. So pilots, ATCs, their family, supporters from all over the country will be coming to DC. Having meetings with members of Congress. It's my job to set up all those meetings, which is always a fun task, but, making sure that we have, people's voices heard, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, especially when they know a lobbyist is involved, they're like, oh, okay, well, they've got it. They don't need to, but I mean, the biggest ammo that I can have with me in any meeting is being able to have stories from individuals that have dealt with hardships that have to do with this issue on the ground, because most members of Congress, I think people think they're all experts on everything. They're generalists, right? They come from a business background. Maybe they were a teacher or doctor, whatever the case might be. They're generalists on most things, and how they make informed decisions is through their constituents, letting them know what they're seeing in their profession, within the district, what they've dealt with as an individual. Nothing moves a member of Congress more than a constituent telling them a problem that they're having. And I can't stress that enough, because it really does help move everything so much faster.
We were lucky to be a part of that. Last year, we sent 3 attorneys, and I think in one day we had 7 congressional meetings that you had set up, and that was unbelievably impressive. And while a difficult day and a very hard day, talking about all those stories and hearing all those stories, to see the impact that it had in the legislative staff was really eye-opening for me. It was wild for me to see how they internalized that and really took it. I always thought those meetings would be a whole, thank you very much for coming. We'll make sure that they, whoever gets the note here. But it really was passionate meetings. It was amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, but believe me, if you're going and talking about a tax nuanced issue, their eyes glaze over pretty quick sometimes. Sure. But with an issue like this, there's a lot of passion from people, right? And people sharing their stories that are very heartfelt and personal to them, being vulnerable in that office.
Yeah.
I have yet to meet a congressional staffer that hasn't really delved into the issue and been like, okay, this is a real problem. We need to look at it. So for us, it's really that education and the storytelling has been so vital in this process across the board. And thank you again for being a part of that last year. It was great to have you and the team out there.
Yeah, we look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's great to know, that it makes a difference. And I think there's a lot of people and again, probably a lot of pilot listeners here that maybe don't give themselves full enough credit for how much they're affecting the process by showing up, telling the stories, helping, talking, being there in numbers. It is impactful. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I know sometimes I start to feel like I'm a drop in the ocean, and we can't feel that way.
Yep. Well, and I think that the current state of politics in this country has made people feel as if their opinions and their feelings don't matter as much in the political process. I've seen it across the board with various organizations that memberships and employees, et cetera, they feel as if their voice doesn't make a difference. But I come from the grassroots advocacy background. That's kind of where I cut my teeth in government affairs work. It drives the day, especially if it's targeted, right? And making sure that we're making targeted noise and bringing the right people into the room. It can move people. And again, I think it's just, people watch the news and they see folks talking about this, that, the other. They're like, okay, well, if I go talk about my problem to a member of Congress, what are they going to care? Because there's tax issues or immigration reform or anything else on the table. But at the end of the day, whether you voted for them or not, they represent you, right? And I think that's always important to remember. In order to keep their job, they need to make sure that their constituents are happy, right? Because otherwise, they're not going to keep that seat. That members of Congress love their jobs very much, and they want to keep them any way they can. So making sure that, we inform them of your personal stories, but also just showing up matters, because at the end of the day, that sort of mentality where they feel that they can't or shouldn't speak up, no one ends up showing up. If everybody felt that way and followed through on that, we're not going to have anybody sharing any stories, and the bill's never going to go anywhere. So it's a big piece just to be involved and to be active.
Joe's been, just a thank you to you and making me aware of how important this is. Every time I get that drop in the ocean type of feeling, what I do doesn't matter, or what I say doesn't matter, or whatever. Joe's been instrumental in really championing our firm and many pilots, and going back and forming relationships to say, no, it does matter. And I'm thankful to hear you say that. I'm thankful for what you've done and bringing my, just bringing that to the forefront of my conscience that it does matter.
I appreciate that. Yeah, this is big. It takes a village.
Sure does.
100%.
All right, Joe, you wrapping us up. I hope we didn't go too long here.
Yeah.
Keep you too long, Austin. Sorry about, this is an easy topic to talk to with a guy like you. I hope we didn't keep you too long.
No, this has been great. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I think this was a great discussion, and, hopefully folks have learned a little something about the process and where we are in it. So very thankful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. From the bottom of our hearts. I mean, this has been something that Dr. Ramos and I are not only passionate from a legal standpoint, but obviously from a personal standpoint, as you were talking about earlier, being a pilot is an identity, and you have that sitting right here.
Absolutely.
So it really is. This push has just meant so much to us. It's meant so much to the firm. It's meant so much to us individually. There are not enough words for us to say thank you for what you guys have done, what Aristotle's done, what PMHC has done to put this thing through. And I can't wait for it to be made into law. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Difference Makers podcast. Please feel free, if you have questions for Austin, if you have questions for us, if you have questions for PMHC, reach out to us. Like, subscribe, follow on all the platforms. We do read all the comments. We interact with them. Please feel free to reach out to us, and look forward to another great episode of the podcast coming up.